But now I think the priority is the power, the energy source, the access to the power and to the grid.
Welcome back to our interview series taking place today at the ATxEnterprise, part of the ATx Singapore. And the show today is taking place at the Singapore Expo. And with me today, I have Marcello Brescia, who's the head of OTT at HGC Global Communications. Welcome to our series.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Tara, and the team.
Okay, that's awesome. So, Marcello here is going to talk about a very interesting area, which is the hyperscalers and enterprise side of telco business. And, let's zoom in first into the hyperscaler space, right? It's a huge space. They are called hyperscaler for a reason.
Yes.
Okay, because they actually scale the IT capabilities for enterprises, for a lot of organizations, and supporting them.
Yes.
Bringing networking capabilities and connecting data center is what you guys do. So maybe, you can let us know how, hyperscalers are demanding bandwidth today.
Yeah.
And, what impact does it have on networks? Because they're consuming so much. And how are you guys adapting your infrastructure to support this?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question, Tara. So as you said, the hyperscale growing fast pace and initially with the cloud, which still grows a lot. But on top of that, also the AI, which we are seeing is growing at a super fast pace nowadays. And so the way we support them, it's from infrastructure point of view, is we try to connect the data center, their data center clusters, wherever their compute is located, through fiber. In the Philippines, we deploy HDD fiber, which allows them to have a resilient network and diversity to connect these data center clusters and allow them to be always on and have a very limited chance to have downtime for ultimately for the users and the organization that you just mentioned. So there is a pressure on the networks of traditional telecoms because the game changed tremendously in the last few years. Whereas before, traditional telecom provide this kind of network, and now I'm not saying it's like changing. It's like an evolution. It's how we need to adapt with the hyperscaler, but also with our data center operators partners to deliver this kind of connectivity.
So I guess, the hyperscaler market is a huge growth market. And it's also a real test to operators' ability because you're looking at the level of bandwidth that you have to commit to these players.
Yes.
And obviously, it's going to be very different from the usual retail customers that you've been serving, right? And with a lot of new type of applications, AI intensive applications, they will demand even more bandwidth.
Yes.
And that brings us to another use case, which is the enterprise use case, where they need bandwidth together with latency, really low latency.
Yes.
So we are now going into the enterprise side where we have a lot of use cases. And one of that is, the edge computing, where we need these low latency networks to support the use cases. So how is HGC catering the demand for low latency use cases?
For enterprise and edge computing, we have something called eyeball as a service, which through IP, we allow the customers to have a fast route because we do peering locally in the markets which are very difficult to deploy infrastructure and applications because it demands a lot of manpower and operational support to deal with all different suppliers there. So with this platform that we have built, if you peer, for example, with HGC, you have access to the majority of the eyeball in those countries. So this helps tremendously, especially enterprises like gaming, or even now with AI, we'll see a new kind of, let's say OTT, we can call that they demand this kind of performances.
So, we have covered the data center to data center connectivity, and then we have covered the edge end of things where you cater for enterprises. Now, now let's look at the other side of things, which is the investments that are going into these places, right?
Yeah.
And I think we discussed earlier before this show how we are seeing a surge in the dollars that are being poured into both the data center space and also in building all the edge computing capabilities. So, what are the trends that you're seeing in this space?
Yeah. Yes, as you said, there is a lot of when we open the news every day, we see this massive investment being announced for hundreds of megawatt of power being deployed. I think the trends we are seeing now, we right now we are just across the straits to Malaysia, Johor, where is now I think almost a 2 gigawatt market, and we are able to do some work there in Malaysia, and we are lucky about that. And so these investments, they go in correlation with the fibers that we support. The trends I'm seeing is there is a change into the geographies, in the sense, for some now Johor being under pressure with so many data center, eventually this investment might move up north. Of course, KL is an important hub as well, but also new places like Delapan or Perak in Malaysia.
Yes.
Philippines as well. We see some new developments there because a lot of subsea cables are landing, and this goes hands on hands with new data center developments there.
Yes.
Of course, we have Thailand, which is also a big market, and then I think regionally Asia is experiencing this kind of trend, and we are lucky to be here because we can upgrade infrastructure, we can connect this cluster as we were mentioning even earlier. So yeah, these are the trends, and I hope we are going to do a lot of work on this.
We see in the news every day, like what you have mentioned, a lot of investments in data centers. We see new data centers being announced. Every other week, you see another huge data center. But behind these data centers, we need the connectivity. Otherwise, data centers will be standing there with all these workloads that they are processing, but then there's no bandwidth to support them. And that's the foundational capability. And that's where operators come in to provide that. I mean, you guys do that best, right? So this is where I guess all the capabilities that has been built over decades come into play to support this level of processing. And also, I guess the other thing that that we did talk about earlier was the AI workloads. So every new data center is also now being built to support AI workloads. And I guess that is also has an implication on how you design this data center to data center connectivity. Right? So what's your take on that?
Yes, I mean, these AI data centers now, because they demand a huge amount of power, they must be located where the energy source is. So in the proximity of this kind of utility. So if few years ago, or even if a data center being built today it's not for AI, but more for traditional colocation. They were when they do a site selection due diligence, it was the connectivity is an important element. But now I think the priority is the power, the energy source, the access to the power and to the grid. The grid is also very important. So it's an opportunity for us because if we need to bring these fiber facilities in a longer distance, it means that we need to build more, and then it's good for our business, of course. But at the same time becomes challenging because to build these networks, you need as diversity, and you need to work with a lot of partners. Even if you need to go from a country to another, you need to work through the regulations and the execution in different markets. And let's not forget the manpower that we need to allocate, so all contractors, and to build that kind of ecosystem, it takes time. At the same time, we are now, especially again with AI, we are used that change happen overnight, and so we need to manage the expectation between the physical layer and the application software layer, let's say.
Yes, exactly. The speeds that, for the physical layer to catch up, it takes time. Right? And like what you have said, now data centers are looking at another key factor, which is, proximity to power. And also, some cooling facilities. So they need water supply as well. And now that, like what you said in the first generation, it was where fiber is. And right now, you guys, the fiber providers, have to follow where the data centers are, right?
Yes.
So it has gone the other way around. So with all this, in place, how is HGC positioning itself to create service differentiation? Both to your data center customers as well as your enterprise customers with your edge computing capabilities and networks?
Yes, I think two things. We, as industry in general, but also the HGC, we need to manage carefully the geopolitics, especially in Asia. So we're trying to do, take a very careful decision on that and the strategies. And then for the edge computing, we are always trying to talk with the customers and understand which solutions. So even before looking at what we have and how we can monetize our network, we always try to understand where the customer is going to be in a few years and what we need to build, where we need to allocate our capital such that we can be ahead of game, and then they really always stick to them to partner and work together. So, for example, for edge computing, especially if you look at Asia, that there's a lot of eyeballs, a lot of users, and young population. We really need to be always in those markets which are underserved, and then build edge platforms where we can have the low latency we talked about earlier, or even simply the access. That's very important as well.
Yes, the first step itself, giving them the access, and then scaling to speed, capacity, and finally to the latency.
So, and even here, for example, we have a lot of satellite companies here that whereas fiber, it might take cannot reach, they supplement with that. But also satellite, there is this misleading that the satellite will replace entirely the fiber networks, but it's not, because they go hand in hand.
Yes. So that's what we have been hearing in today's sessions and all this from the speakers as well, where they say that it's about collaborating. It's like a converged system, 5G, and both terrestrial and non-terrestrial coming together to provide this. And, so we are all part of a bigger ecosystem.
Yes.
End of the day, we have to make sure that the coverage is ubiquitous. Everyone gets access to the internet.
Yes.
And then for different enterprises and use cases, they get the SLAs that they want. So I think that's the vision.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess we've covered these key topics and one of the key topics in our sessions as well. So thank you so much, Marcello,
thank you
for joining us
and
for sharing these insights.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and have a nice show.
Yep, and let's catch up again in another session.
Yes, let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah.